Okay, with that said, let's start today's session. This is about the XML, and actually, according to the syllabus, we had we have to start with the XML part, but I thought of starting with HTML and CSS because that's the basis for developing web pages, and I hope now you are comfortable with creating web pages and also styling with CSS. But the other part that we need to discuss is how we can actually use to store data, exchange data. So in that particular case, it's again need to discuss how we may actually use XML as a starting point. So if you look at XML as a starting point, you can notice that it's very similar to the structure that we have seen in HTML. We'll come to that. But ideally, we use XML for exchange data. So in HTML, we had predefined set of tags. For example, we started saying HTML, and within that we have a head and a body and so on. So we have a predefined set, but in XML, you will see we can define our own set of tags, and this is for representing data. So basically, we can use XML to describe what data and not the representation, right? So it's text-based. So XML started with what is XML? If we start with that, this is stand for Extensible Markup Language, which is slightly different from what we have discussed with the HTML. So we can actually talk about our own, tags for this, right? And as I told you earlier, this was designed to store and structure data. And as I told you again, it's self-descriptive. And also based on the subset of standard generalist markup language, which in short we say HTML. So this could be used to create set of rules for creating other markup languages. And that is also what we call W3 recommendation. You can notice that when you have like HTML in different versions, so there will be a consortium who's responsible for looking at how the compatibility based on different browsers and so on. Right. So it's platform independent. So therefore, whatever we have with the developed with, for example, whether you are using in Windows, Linux, Mac OS, that you can use XML, and also you can use with any programming language like Python, Java, PHP, and so on. So it's universal. So that means it's essential skill that you understand how you may use this. Not only that, the XML is actually foundation for many modern languages. For example, if you look at the HTML5, is the newest version, which is based on the, as I told you earlier, HTML and also the XML principles. And there are many others as well. XHTML is again based on that. Again, you will form strict, we call XML based version of HTML. Then we have MathML, I'll come to that, show you, like, for example, when you want to represent mathematics and mathematical notation on the web, MathML is used to describe this. And the images, SVG, we call it scalable vector graphics. So basically used for this. And there are many others, right? Even this is used as KML, which is used to exchange geographical information in apps like Google Earth, right? There are many others, for example, SOAP, RSS, and so on. So therefore, it's essential that we understand how XML is used, how XML is structured, understanding, creating your own, tags to represent the structured data. And you will notice that the recent newer versions of this, for example, like JSON formats, are based on this. And also, if we look at the database systems like MongoDB, use something called BSON, which is also a extension from this. Right. Here are like some examples. If you look at with this, before we talk about this, how many of you are familiar with LaTeX or LaTeX? Is there anyone who's familiar with the mathematical representations? Any one of you are familiar? Okay, one. Okay, we have one. Eranga, yes. Any other? Okay, maybe if you're not very familiar, maybe later the course I will give you a brief introduction to LaTeX or LaTeX. So basically, when we prepare the documents, especially scientific documents like research papers, journal papers, or even the books, people use LaTeX. And in LaTeX, what we use is again a markup language, which also could be used for that, right? If you visit, there are web-based, implementations of this nowadays. It's easier for this. Overleaf is one. Since you have not done, I'm not going to discuss it in detail, but in LaTeX, for example, equations like this can be written with a small code like this, which defines the mathematical equation, right? So, for example, here the fact is to say you are going to have a fraction part, and then you can notice that there are some curly brackets. Hope you can notice that we have curly brackets here. So this is a frac is the fractional part, and then the first curly bracket will represent the upper part of this, and then this is the lower part of this. And within that, you can notice how we use plus and minus. So you can notice here slash plus and minus, which represent this one. And then square root, it's here. And this is how we represent p square. Okay, so similar to this, if you want to represent this in the web, early days we have a difficulty of representing the mathematical equations on the web. Usually we have used graphics for this. But MathML is, you can notice here, has its own set of tags which describes, mathematical equations, right? As you can see here. So it has a structure which is actually based on the XML. So that's why I said learning XML principles is very important. Another example, I don't know how many of you are using SVGs. How many of you are familiar with SVGs? I hope you are familiar with the the image formats like JPEGs and PNGs. Is anyone is familiar with SVGs? Okay. Now, again, I'll also have a small session on that about discussing this. So what you have noticed here, simple graphic here, we have a square and a circle and set of lines here is described using this XML, right? So some of the programs, when you actually draw graphics, internally, it'll generate this XML code. It's text-based and that can be used. And this is a very popular format uh, on the web, like when you have image representations, right? Especially if you have geometrical shapes, you can create very accurate, graphics. And if you know this here, for example, um, I will show you like the rectangle part. You can see here, this is the rectangle part of this. And here the command, it shows a rectangle. So you can notice that it start with the rect and provide the X and Y, the coordinate. So that means the starting point, and then the width and the height, the fill color, right? And you can see stroke width is 2 and the stroke is green. So you can notice that it defines the filling color as well as the stroke color in green color. Similar to that, you can also notice the circle. Here, CX, CY define the X and Y coordinate for the center of the circle and the radius and the fill color, right? Okay, so I think point is you will notice what this is, and similarly, in applications like Google Earth, the XML is used uh, to represent different geographical locations, right? So a lot of information you can keep when you take a one geographical locations. So that also actually based on the XML. So as you have already seen here, right? So it's very important that we understand the XML and how we can use XML to store data in a structured manner, right? So as I told you earlier, it is used in many places. We have observed some examples using MathML, where we can represent equations and how we can use tags to describe mathematical equations. And SVG, we have seen how we can represent the geometrical shapes like rectangles, circles, and even the gradients of color. And finally, we have seen the KML, right? So the important point that here is actually XML here is enables to work with the different systems and even the visualization tools. And it imports now in this. So I think now that we have observed some example, let's understand how XML is structured. So we'll start first with the XML elements, the nodes, right? So XML elements or nodes are the building blocks of any XML document. Now, for example, you can see here course. So the tag in XML, actually, you can create your own names, right? So therefore, I mean, let's say I want to represent um, the course information, and within the course information, let's say I want to keep the lecture information. So you can notice that I have started with course because I want to represent information about the course. And within that, you can notice we have lecturer that I want to define a particular lecture information. So you can notice that the course is the parent, and then within that we have the lecture. We normally call this as parent and child relationships. So you have these are actually tags we have defined, actually user defined tags we call it. And actually you can have attributes and the text content. Right now, here we don't have any attributes. I hope you remember the attributes that we have discussed earlier, right? With HTML, you are familiar with that. And here, for example, under the lecturer, we define the name. And this is the tag that we have used, and this is the text content, the university and the phone information. Right. Now, one thing to note when you talk about uh, the XML, tags when you're defining, you will have a kind of a structure. So I have like highlighted various different parts in the simple XML document. Now this is actually, we can save it as XML, like using a notepad, same way we have created HTML. So we can create XML document, and you can notice that it also contains a start and end tag, right? For example, you can hear the course ends with the course tag, lecturer end with the lecturer. And then what is inside these tags, we call the text content. And of course, you can have attributes as well. Now, in this particular case, you can notice compared to this one, we have extended, and the phone, right? Here we have just the phone number in the local format. But let's say I want to say a type. It's attribute that I'm going to use to say that, okay, I'm going to use an international format. So that's the attribute. Sometimes you don't have both open and closed tags. We normally call self-closing tag. For example, email, you don't have anything here, right? And we have a attribute called hide. We say yes, right? So these are the kind of the properties that we will notice when we are creating XML documents. Right. Now remember, when you are creating XML tags to store structured information, we normally use a hierarchical structure. We normally call a tree structure, right? So you have a root element, right? Basically, in this particular case, we start with the course, right? And then we have the lecturer. So I told you already is this will represent the parent. When you go on to the top and when you go to the bottom, you have lecturer. And within the lecturer, we have like name, university, phone. These are like similar levels we normally call siblings. Why we use this kind of a structure here. Later on, we can use various different viewers to view XML documents. And then it's easier when you have, this tree structure. So we will create our own, and I will show you like how you can actually, view XML document and you visualize this tree structure, right? So this is to understand how we can actually nest, data. Right. You can use any browser to open up an XML, and there are like different, viewers as well. So maybe we can create our simple XML document, and then let's try to view it, right? So shall we do the same thing from what we have created earlier? So maybe we will try to view our previous one. Okay. So shall we create this one, and then maybe we will view it using different ways. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to type this into a notepad. Hope you can do the same along with me. Let me open up the notebook. Actually, you can use any text editor, although I'm using Notebook here. Even you can, if you are using like editor like VS Code, could be used for this very same purpose. Right. Let me create the file. I told you like you can create your own, tags. Uh, so in this particular case, you can define the hierarchy. Actually, it's not necessary to, put the spacing, but as a practice, I'm going to use this. Notice that how we create a self-proceed tag. Right. Let me save this. So I'm going to say post.xml. So make sure that you use the extension XML, and then I'm going to click save. Right. The next part is that actually you can use. So if you open up in my case, I have a Chrome browser. You can just put it there, and it actually visualize it. So let me show you like how it look like when I open up this in my browser, right? This particular case, I have loaded it with the browser. So here is my file, and then I have opened up using the Chrome browser. You can simply drag and drop, right? If you open up Chrome, if you drag and drop on this, then you can open it up. As we have already seen, you can use the browser itself to view your XML document. And there are like viewers that you can use, and there are many. And this is like one of them where you can see that you can use various viewers for this, right? So even you can view, convert, between this. You can give it a try. But let me use, okay, but I'm expecting the XML viewer. So let me click the XML view. And then maybe I can make it a small. Okay, I can see now. So now I'm going to copy paste my code. Let me take a copy of this. Okay. Pressing Control C and Control V. You can notice that it shows you different way the structure. So outcome is formatted so that we can actually see it very clearly. Now this is actually very small file. Of course, this is very useful when we have a complex XML document, right? So you can notice that it shows you the output. So hope now you have seen creating a simple XML document and also viewing using various ways. We have tried with the browser and now with the Code Beautify, which is a XML viewer. Right. Now that I hope you have finished up to this point, and then let's move on. So the next thing that we are going to discuss a little bit more on the XML, how we structure. Because when we are using, there are like some of the rules that we need to follow. So I would like to start on this. What are the rules that you need to follow? Okay, let's switch to the note again there. Right. Now remember, well-formed XML documents are very, very important, and that's what I'm going to stress here, right? And then remember, there are different elements that we have discussed. We have root element, and then we have other element. In my case, in this very small example, the lecturer is the root element, right? So we can say that this is the parent of all the other elements, right? Um, and you have, okay, one thing is you have to have a root element, and the other one is something that I missed. Uh, it's case sensitive. And the nesting is very, very important. You have to properly nest it as well, right? What is inside? For example, in previous case, we have discussed the lecture, and within that, we have nested all these name, university phone within the lecture, right? And if you have any attributes, you have to use quotes that you have observed here. So here we have the attributes, right? And you use quote for this. And the next one is the prologue XML, which defines something like this, and normally it comes as on the top. In our document, we have not mentioned this, but ideally we should have included this one, right? So it's very important that we use this. So maybe we could update our document and save it. Okay, so in our case, we have course. So use of the very first one. We have to say, okay, XML version. And let's say 1.0, sorry, 1.0. and then like this, it's very important. Of course, encoding it's not compulsory, but you can say if you're prepare a document using Unicode, that's must. But this line is optional, but if you are using it, it should come as the very first line, right? So let me save, and maybe we can view as well. Maybe we can refresh. You don't see any difference here. Let me check whether we have saved it, right? Yes, we have saved. Okay. And also let's copy paste this, and we'll update the view as well. Right? So you don't see any difference. That's why I said it's the optional one. It will not show, but this line should come first if you're using it. Right. Going back to the contents, another rule that we need to discuss is basically all elements you have to have open and close tag, right? That's what we say, and we have observed that earlier as well. Now look at the example of representing a name. So we can start with the name and end with the slash close tag. But then if you do not have uh, uh, the close tag separately, okay, for example, in our previous one email, and this should be necessary, right? That might be error that you have made. Sometimes if you're a beginner, you might miss this, but if you don't have that, which means if you have no closing tag, then you have to have self closing tag. This is what we say, right? Um, and I think I discussed that it's case sensitive as well. Next, the proper nesting is very, very important, right? Now, for example, let's say we are going to define some markup, like, for example, HTML, we have used bold using B and italics using I. And for example, if you want to make it like bold and italics, the particular sentence, then if you start with B and I like this, you should first, close I, then B. I think sometimes in HTML, it doesn't matter that the order, but in XML, we have to properly nested this. So it's very important that uh, focus on the nesting. And if you are using any attributes, always you have to use quotes for this, right? So font type, in our previous example, we say it's an intentional format we have used, and we say type international, and this is the attribute value. This is the attribute, type is the attribute, and this is the attribute value. So XML attribute values must all be quoted. So you have to use double quote for this. Right. Next, entity references. Now you know that we are using, when you're representing the tags, we are using angle brackets less than or greater than. But let's say you want to represent less than or greater than, that the angle bracket we say sometimes. So you should not use this character in the middle of the XML element. So let's say you want to use it, then there are like a special way of representing this. I think you might have noticed this in, this kind of, references we have using even in HTML. When you want to when you want to use the spaces, right? And even when you want to represent like copyright, right? So similar to this, these are like some of the characters. So when you want to use something like this, less than or ampersand, so remember you have to use this entity. These are called entity references, and you have to use them. if you want to use any of these symbols within the XML in that XML element. Right. I think we got some basics, right? So one more thing. Usually, if you want to make some, comments, so it's the same as what we use in HTML as well, right? You start with the angle bracket and then exclamation mark and two dashes, and you can type whatever you want, and then we will have dash dash and the closing angle bracket. Right. Let's look at the very first one, although, okay, so it's not a group work. So let's create an information keep for a particular person, right? So I want each and everyone to create your own version of, you know, XML file, right? And then let's see how we can differently create the XML for this particular case. Right. We are going to discuss a very important topic we call namespaces. I think the namespaces actually applied in other contexts as well. The mainly what I want to discuss here is now we are allowed to use any name, user-defined, tags. So how do you handle when you have the same tags, especially when you're combining, two, XML documents or XML fragments together, right? Now, when you want to handle conflicts, we are using what we call the XML namespaces, right? So the idea is of use of namespaces is when you have like when you want to have like several HTML XML tags when you want to mix documents, especially when you're using different applications. Can you notice that in the left-hand side, we have lecturer, title, name, information here, and then the right-hand side, we have HTML tags. Notice that in the two fragments, we have the same tag, title. So in this part, we have title tag. At the same time, here also we have title tag. Actually means two different things. So this will cause conflicts because it's coming from the different vocabularies in normally call it. So for that, we have to use something called prefixes, right? Okay, let's see how we can, handle this. So we can use prefix in this particular case. Can you notice that we are using sin and x to separate out? We call this as use of namespaces, just to show you that okay, these are like coming from different vocabularies, right? Um, um, so you can notice here, instead of just say course, when you're combining, you can notice here, when you're combining this with this one. So to separate that one, you can notice here we have used C and a colon. So the first part, we represent the course information and we use C colon for this one. So the set of this, and then we have the remaining part, we have used X. So now you can see, you combine within here, right? Within the course, we have this information. And this is like the course page that we are going to include it. So the conflict that we are going to resolve here is the title confusion. So with the prefix that we have used here, the C and X, we can avoid that. right? So in other words, we are using prefixes to resolve any conflicts, especially when you have having like the uh, same text coming from different context, right? Now, when we are going to use this, we use something called uniform resource identifier. We call URI. These are called namespaces. They are called identifiers, but not actually a web resource, right? So the most common URI is the URL, Internet Domain Address, and another is URI, called Uniform Resource Name, uh, that can be used as Uniform Resource Identifier. Right. Now let's look at how it is defined. So you can notice here in this particular example, we have used URIs to separate out these two vocabularies, right? So especially in this particular case, we are defining XML namespace. You can see here C course XML namespace C, which is we have put up a URL here for this information, right? Uh, it's a name. It's not a location. Remember, it's just a name that we use here, not a particular locations that we have used, although it looks like a for HTML1, this is the default. You will notice that when you're creating and using the namespaces, when you're using, you can use URI information, and it's very similar. In this particular case, again, we will say XML namespace X, and this will define the what we call the URI, right? So as I told you earlier, these are used for the identifiers when we are creating XML documents. Right. I think, hope you got an idea um, about use of URIs. The idea of actually why we are using URIs here is we are using some unique name. Hmm? and not confusing this with any other place, any other organization, right? So when you're using XML to exchange data, this is very, very important, right? Um, okay, so I hope you got an idea about what a namespace is, right? So let's extend this with a small example. So in this particular case, you can notice that we combine both. Uh, so instead of in previous one have it separately here, you can notice that URI information we have specified separately. So it goes here and the XML, HTML here. You can see you can combine the both, right? So this is what normally we will observe when we create the separate namespaces. Right. It's the same thing that instead of putting it in here, so we will define the first line itself. Right. Now, the default namespace um, and default namespace is we don't have to have a prefix. So in this particular case, you will notice that we are not using uh, a prefix for the first part, and we are using prefix only for the second part in the HTML part. So this is what we call the default namespace. So we don't have to specify prefix in this particular case, although we have the title, so we have it here. But here we are not using any prefix. So we call this as a default namespace. So that's a term we that use when you're using resolving conflicts. You don't have to always define the namespace. So you can have some tags without any prefix, and then normally we call them as default namespaces. Right. Okay. Next exercise. Although I said group work two, it's the second exercise. Again, create a similar but same example you can extend, assuming that it coming from two different departments, right? And use namespaces when you're creating this. But yes, I can give you some suggestions on solving this one. Maybe yes, we'll use new one, right? Let me say I'm going to create person information, right? So I can say person. So that's what we have discussed earlier, right? So you finish saying it's the particular person that we are going to define. Then the next one is within this, you will have a single root, and within that, you can keep other relevant information. Let's say I want to have name. For example, email. Let's see. Uh, then what I told you here is different departments can keep different information about a person, right? So, for example, I can say HR department. Let me say HR keeps track of HR information, right? For example, I can think about the position, let's say. Vacancies. Right? Maybe the date, let's say the, the date that you have joined to the institute. For example, let me see something like this. And let's say another department also wants to keep track of this. Let's say IT department. And in this particular case, let's say IT department normally provides some information about this, your access role. So, for example, what kind of a role you are providing. Let me say a role, then I'm going to say, okay, lecturer or administrator. So some information related to IT. For example, username. Let's see. So let's say some information that they want to keep track of. Right. Now, the problem comes in sometimes we can have the same date here. Let's say date, yes. in this particular case, the date that a particular person's create is this. So let me say it's a different date. Like let's say 3 and let me say 4, right? So the problem with this is you might use your own and that might be confusing, right? So these are the kind of conflicts coming from when you keep track of the information, right? What we have discussed here is you can actually use a prefix so that you can avoid the confusions. Um, and for example, in this particular case, we can have uh, prefix for everything. And I told you like you don't have to do this. So I'm not going to create any um, prefix for person, but let's say I'm going to create prefix for HR and IT, right? So in an HR and IT, I can have some prefix. So for example, um, I will say HR, maybe I will say we'll use H, right? And then you can have H. So that you are going to resolve this conflicts. So in this particular case, you have to change, right, using prefix here. Similar to this, let me use for this, it's I, then I'm going to use I here. So now you can see we are using different, right? With the prefix, it will not be the same thing. But this is the second thing that we have discussed. Third one we have discussed is use of URI information, right? So that usually we define it here. Of course, we can say XML namespace. Of course, it's depend on the organization, assuming that it's the Peradenian. I can say http slash slash pdn.ac.lk and I'm going to use person, right? That's default one when I'm using person. But then I have to define for HR and then for the IT. So I'm going to define those as well. XML namespace. Let me say H, that is for HR. So I will say http ac.lk slash we say H. Again, XML namespace I. This is for IT department. Right. I mean, there are many things that we can include, which I will discuss later on. For example, how do you check the formatting and all? I hope, but you got the idea, I guess. Right. So let me save this. We'll save this as person.xml. Let me copy paste this and observe this with our code beautify. Copy paste this, and you can see it will show me the tree structure with all these namespace information. So the person, we have taken the default namespace. There's no prefix there. But then HR information and IT information I have separated. Right? So that's how it looks with the Code Beautify HTML viewer. Maybe we could open the same in Chrome and see. Let me drag and drop. Yes. Of course, one thing I actually forgot to include the first line. I think I better include that information as well. So maybe as a practice, we should include XML version, let's say 1.0, sorry, 0. You can say encoding if you're thinking of using. Okay, so I got answers from Deshani. Thanks sharing your output. Keep it with you. I'll put it in these two in the LMS, so you can submit your XML files. Okay, right. Now, very important what we are going to discuss in this part, which we call XML schema. Now, what we are going to discuss under this is the logical structure in the document, right? Now, remember, people can, create these documents in various different ways, and how do you handle this various different structures, right? So we can use XML schema to describe the logical structure of the XML document. So using the schema, we can do different things. We can define what can come in a document, you know, because you can define different tags. So we call elements. So you can see. So then you have a control, right? Otherwise, people can come up with the various different elements. You can also define the attributes could appear in a documents. And I told you, like, you have some parent elements, you have child elements, right? We are maintaining a hierarchy, right? So you can define what elements are the child elements, what is the order of the child elements, if you want to specify particular order, like remember we have seen the name and so on, right, in our document. And also we can define how many, child elements, can be used. Um, whether it's empty, whether you can have a text, we have seen, like when you say a name, you have particular value, and then, open and close tag. So whether it can be empty. So sometimes you might not have a value, right? And you can also use the default and fixed values. And to define the schemas, we can use two standards. We have a document type definition, or in short, we say DDT. And you can have XML schema definition, we say XSD. Right. Now, the difference between these two is The DTT can define the structure, but not particular data types. But if you're using XSD, you can use the syntax and also what data it supports, like whether you can use string, integer, and so on, right? Um, okay, right. Now, going into the details, the two standards, DTT, stands for document type definition. Basically, you can think it as a set of rules how you should mark up XML document, right? So in a document, we can have elements like in our case, we have lecturer, we have name, and so on. We can specify for each element and its attributes and the values the attributes can take. So it's important that what people actually could use. Uh, and we can use DDT also to use how they are contain each other, right? And this is important because XML can documents can be created by various different programs and they are consistent. So to make it consistent, we are using DTT. Right now, let's look back our previous example. So this is the XML document. We have the root node lecturer. Within that, we have three other elements: name, university, and phone. Right. So when you want to use DDT here, you can notice, right? So we describe what could be included. So you can notice that in the first one, it shows that we have lecturer, that is a root, and the root can contain like three elements. The three childs are name, university, and here we have defined what elements are there. So going back again from where we have discussed, right? So in our case, we had lecture information, right? So the details you can notice here, the first one is same as earlier, that we will define the header information about the XML version and the elements we define using the element, and then you can have the element name and any components. So you can see here element lecturer, we can say lecturer element, and you have name, university, and phone numbers. And then you can see the element name, and we say PC data. Basically, what we are saying is it's a name is a text data, right? And then, for example, if you remember earlier, we can have empty values, right? In email, it's just one. Remember, we had self-contained value. So then you can say empty. So with this information, what we are saying, the email has no content, no code, right? So you start with the declaration, then that's what we say the header, and then we have the element one. We define this. One thing actually it's missing here is the doc type. What this defines is it defines the DTT. The lecture specify the structure of the document. So that's what comes up here. So I think now it's clear for us. So this will define the lecturer with three elements, and each of these elements you will see we can have text information, right? We have character data. Right. Now, interesting point is now earlier when we create the XML, we didn't have this information, this structure. So when you include this information with the file itself, you can validate when you yeah, have, you can validate. Right. Going back to the next one, when you have like multiple elements, right? For example, let's say we have course and then we have multiple lecture information, right? So you can have a plus. When you have a plus, right? When you have a plus, what it says is, okay, you can have like more lecturers. For example, you can have course, lecturer, and the first lecture information, then another lecturer. So you can have multiple elements. And let's say that some information is optional. Now, for example, let's say when you define the lecturer, we want to have name and university, but let's say we don't, okay, you can include, but let's say it's not compulsory, right? So then we can include the question marks, and the question marks indicate that these are optional values, right? So we can actually use various, different one when you define this information. Okay, so I hope you got the idea like how you actually use elements. Then comes the attributes. So we say attribute list, and then you can have element name and attribute name, and then you can have type information. So for example, we have attribute list. Let's say the element name is phone, and then the name is phone, and the type is the data we have. It says the character data. C data means the character data. And then you can have unspecified. And then let's say it's compulsory to have it. Remember that in earlier case, we have phone and we say type international, right? So when you say required, it's compulsory to you have. So you can have different rules: required, implied, fixed, and even we can have default value of the attribute. I'll come to that. So now when you combine with, let's look at an example and let's combine this together. Now with the DDT, remember now we are defining the rule set, what the XML document should follow. So from my previous example, you can notice here we have course, we have lecturer, and within that we have name, university, and for. And this one define the rule set using the DDT for the course, and what is inside will define what elements are possible. You can notice that this will list the under the course we can have lecturer, name, university, and for. And within that, you can notice that lecturer could contain the character information, name, character data. So it's a character data. University also data and this data. And what happened, this will be now a single document. When I say single document, now you can have the information, all the information together, right? So that's what we need to do. So going back to our the course information, so we can include that information here, and then we can combine. And when you load it with the browser or the any viewer, it automatically evaluated, right? It actually verified whether it has the or the structure in it. Okay. So that's what we are expecting. So let's try to do this. I'm going to have course here. So let's put up the information here. So we can say doc type. And within that, we are going to define all the elements. Lecturers. We'll finish here the doc type. And you can notice now within this, we have now course, we have lecturer, name, university, phone. Of course, I'm going to remove this part because we have not defined any attribute yet. So we'll use that one. Otherwise, we have to incorporate that one as well. Right. And then, okay, I'm going to remove this one as well because it's not listed. Lecturer course. Okay. Let me save it as, I'm going to say course one. So let me put down, let me open up this again with we use the browser. Let me see how it shows in the browser now, right? And also let me copy paste here. Actually, here we have XML validate as well. So I think it should be somewhere XML validator. Okay. So here we have XML validator, whether this is a valid document. So maybe control P. Okay, so here are the information and it says valid. right? Um, so I hope now you understand how we can use DDT to validate XML document. So as I told you, the requirement that we have discussed is when you're creating XML documents by various different programs, we have to make sure that they are consistent. So in this particular case, we have discussed the rules that we can use to define uh, for the elements, specifying the order and specifying the what data you can have, right? Not data, the type specifically that we will come in the next one with the XLT. But today we have to finish up to DDT. Right. With that, I'm going to finish for today. I have given you like small exercise you to upload the exercise two with the exercise on creating XML document namespace.